You know the feeling. You're out, you check your phone, and the battery is holding steady at 30%. Then you try to open the camera and the screen goes black. When you finally plug it in, the phone reboots and immediately shows 29%. The battery wasn't actually dead. Your phone didn't catch a virus, and the hardware didn't randomly fail. The operating system made a calculated decision to kill the power. This specific behavior started happening to millions of people simultaneously. If you owned an iPhone 6S, an SE, or an iPhone 7, you were likely caught in this wave of sudden, unexplained shutdowns. When you pay nearly $1,000 for a premium device, you assume you own it. You assume you control how it operates. Deep inside the operating system, however, a hidden line of code proved that the manufacturer was still the one pulling the strings. In the winter of 2017, Apple released iOS 10.2.1. The release notes called it a minor update with bug fixes and security improvements. In reality, it contained a massive, undisclosed mechanism designed to alter how your phone's processor behaved. To ensure no one noticed the change, Apple sandboxed the data. They isolated the battery diagnostics so completely that third-party repair shops and independent app developers were entirely blind to the artificial speed limits now governing the hardware. Apps that used to open instantly began to stutter. Keyboards lagged. A phone that felt fast on Monday felt like a 5-year-old device by Tuesday. Without any explanation from the hardware, the only logical conclusion for most users was that the device itself was simply obsolete. By engineering this ignorance, what could have been a straightforward explanation of battery wear turned into a highly effective sales driver. Millions of users walked into stores and bought new, full-priced devices to replace phones that were actually fully functional. To be fair to Apple's engineers, lithium-ion cells age quietly. They don't fail in explosive, obvious ways. Every time you charge and discharge, the chemistry inside slowly degrades. This diagram shows what happens inside those cells over hundreds of charge cycles. A microscopic film builds up on the internal components. As that dark, restrictive layer gets thicker, it steadily increases the battery's internal electrical resistance. When you do something demanding, like launch a heavy app, the processor asks for a massive spike of power. That high internal resistance causes the voltage to suddenly sag and collapse. Electronics need a minimum stable voltage to operate safely. If that flow drops below the critical threshold, the phone's hardware executes a hard, immediate shutdown to protect its own circuitry. The unexpected 30% shutdowns were real. The lithium-ion degradation was real. Apple's engineering team was facing a legitimate, unavoidable constraint of physics. Their solution was an algorithm called dynamic voltage and frequency scaling, or DVFS. DVFS operated silently in the background, continuously monitoring the health of the battery. If it detected that the battery was old and degraded, the algorithm deliberately choked the CPU's processing speed, preventing it from ever drawing enough power to trigger a shutdown. This fix worked as intended. Somewhere inside corporate leadership, however, the decision was made to deploy this performance cap without ever telling the people who actually bought the phones. Writing a power management algorithm is standard engineering. Deploying that algorithm behind the user's back crosses the line into a silent, unethical downgrade of a purchased product. The cover-up unraveled because of a 17-year-old on Reddit. He noticed his iPhone 6S was crawling, while his brother's newer phone on the exact same software was perfectly fast. He bought a $79 replacement battery, swapped it in, and ran benchmark tests before and after. The processor score showed a massive jump. The phone hardware was perfectly fine. The software had been artificially restraining the chip, and fresh chemistry was the only variable required to take the leash off. This graph visualizes exactly what independent data analysts found when they replicated the teenager's test. Every peak in that shattered distribution represents a specific artificial limit placed on the CPU to manage power consumption. As the data hit the front page of every major technology outlet in the world, Apple's public relations apparatus went completely silent for 9 agonizing days. A teenager with a screwdriver and some basic benchmark data had stripped the world's most powerful tech company of its deniability. They were finally forced to answer for the silent modification of user property. The immediate aftermath was severe. Within days, an avalanche of over 60 separate class action lawsuits were filed across the United States, which a judge eventually consolidated into a massive multi-district federal case. The plaintiffs didn't argue about the nuances of battery chemistry. They pinned Apple down with a specific legal charge: fraud by omission. Under this doctrine, you don't have to tell an outright lie to commit fraud. Deliberately withholding material information that would change a consumer's purchasing decision, like replacing an old battery instead of buying a brand new phone, is functionally identical to lying. Cornered by the data and the law, Apple settled. They agreed to pay up to $500 million in the federal class action, alongside another $113 million to settle a separate investigation led by 34 state attorneys general. The legal system looked at the practice of treating user devices as black boxes and officially recognized it for what it was: a form of corporate fraud. The most lasting result wasn't the financial penalty. Apple was legally forced to change its software, building a highly visible battery health menu into iOS, complete with a UI toggle allowing users to completely turn off the performance management. That specific toggle represents the legal enforcement of informed consent. It forces the company to admit the throttle exists and hands the power of choice directly back to the consumer. This settlement changed the terms of service in 34 states. It created a legal baseline that prevents a manufacturer from using a software update to quietly degrade the performance of your device. Batterygate exposed the illusion of hardware ownership. By taking a tech giant to court over a few lines of code, consumers successfully fought to reclaim the devices in their own pockets.